27 years ago, an entire class vanished, until a desperate mother noticed a crucial detail. 27 years ago, a quiet town was shattered by an unspeakable tragedy. On what should have been an ordinary school trip, an entire class of young students vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and heartbreak. Imagine waking up every day for nearly 3 decades, haunted by the memory of someone you loved more than anything, a child who disappeared into thin air, their fate unknown. For Laura Calloway, this nightmare became her reality. But one day, while flipping through old photographs, she noticed something no one else had seen before. A detail so small it seemed insignificant, yet so crucial, it could change everything. What if that tiny clue held the key to unraveling a mystery that had tormented families for generations? The story begins on a grey morning in September, 27 years after the disappearance. The sky is heavy with clouds, mirroring the weight of grief that still lingers over the community. Laura sits at her dressing table, staring at a photograph of her daughter Rory, frozen forever as a bright-eyed 5th grader. Her hands tremble as she holds the picture close, tears welling up in her eyes. This isn't just another anniversary. It's a reminder of all the birthdays, holidays, and milestones stolen from her family. Yet amidst the sorrow, there's also determination. Laura has never stopped searching for answers. Even when everyone around her urged her to let go, she knows deep down that closure won't come until she uncovers the truth, no matter how painful it might be. As Laura steps out of her house, the neighborhood feels eerily unchanged, like time itself has stood still. The streets are lined with houses that look much the same as they did decades ago, but inside those homes, lives have been irrevocably altered. Laura heads to her best friend Helen's house, another mother whose child vanished on that fateful trip. Together, they share a bond forged in unimaginable loss, supporting each other through the darkest days. Over cups of Earl Grey lavender tea, they sift through old memories, laughing and crying over faded photographs. It's during these moments that Laura stumbles upon a photo she doesn't recognize. A class picture taken in front of a yellow school bus. Something about it feels off, though she can't quite put her finger on why. At first glance, the image seems innocent enough. Smiling children, posing proudly alongside their teacher. But as Laura studies it closer, her blood runs cold. Why is Principal Lillian Brooks standing among them? According to official reports, she wasn't supposed to be on the trip. Instead, it was Mr. Gregory, the classroom teacher, and an administrative staff member who accompanied the kids. Questions swirl in Laura's mind, gnawing at her resolve not to get lost in false hope again. Could this oversight mean nothing, or does it point to something far darker? Helen tries to reassure her, reminding her of past leads that led nowhere. But Laura can't shake the feeling that this time might be different. Determined to find answers, Laura makes an impulsive decision to visit Principal Brooks's house. The once familiar neighborhood now feels foreign, its silence amplifying the storm brewing within her. When she arrives, the garden is immaculately maintained, a stark contrast to the chaos in Laura's thoughts. As she knocks on the door, her heart pounds in anticipation. Principal Brooks answers, polite but visibly uneasy. Their conversation starts innocently enough, but Laura quickly senses hesitation in the older woman's responses. Then, almost imperceptibly, Brooks glances over her shoulder towards someone inside the house, a young woman Laura doesn't recognize. Who is she, and why does the principal seem so nervous around her? Back at the cemetery later that afternoon, Laura visits her daughter's grave, clutching the bouquet of flowers she picked out earlier. The air is damp from recent rain, carrying with it the scent of earth and lingering sadness. Nearby, Helen and Matthew stand by their daughter Sally's tombstone, united in shared grief. Just as Laura prepares to leave, she spots the same young woman from Principal Brooks's house, standing near a row of graves dedicated to the missing children. Her presence here can't be a coincidence, can it? Summoning her courage, Laura approaches the stranger, who looks startled, but eventually admits she comes here every year to grieve. When Laura presses further, asking if she knew any of the missing students, the woman grows defensive, but not before revealing a framed photograph clutched tightly to her chest. The resemblance between the woman and the girl in the photo sends chills down Laura's spine. What unfolds next will challenge everything Laura thought she knew about the case, and about herself. As secrets begin to unravel, the line between hope and despair blurs. Was Principal Brooks involved in the tragedy? Or is there another explanation for her strange behavior? And who is this mysterious woman really? Each revelation brings Laura closer to the truth, but also deeper into danger. By the end of the day, she'll face choices that could either bring justice for the victims or bury the past forever. But for now, as the sun sets over the cemetery, casting long shadows across the gravestones, one thing is certain: nothing will ever be the same again. Stay tuned to discover what happens next in this gripping tale of loss, resilience, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. As Laura left Helen's house, with the photograph clutched tightly in her hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was about to unfold. The image of Principal Lillian Brooks, standing beside the children, gnawed at her thoughts like an unrelenting itch. For years, Laura had believed what everyone else did, that Mr. Gregory and an administrative staff member were solely responsible for the ill-fated trip. But now, doubt crept into every corner of her mind. What if the principal had been involved? What if she hadn't just stayed behind, but played a far darker role? The bus ride to town felt endless, as Laura replayed fragments of conversations from over 2 decades ago. She remembered attending meetings where parents discussed logistics for school trips, always assuming everything was above board. Yet, there had been whispers, small murmurs among some families, who claimed they'd heard different names mentioned when it came to chaperones. At the time, Laura dismissed them as gossip or miscommunication. Now those whispers seemed louder, more insistent, demanding attention. When Laura arrived at the florist, she found herself distracted by memories of Rory. Every bouquet she picked out carried its own story, a reminder of birthdays missed, holidays celebrated alone, milestones marked only by tears shed over a cold gravestone. This year, though, the flowers felt heavier somehow, burdened not just by grief, but by the weight of unanswered questions. As Sarah handed her the carefully arranged bouquet, Laura forced a smile, thanking her before stepping back into the drizzle outside. Her next stop would be the cemetery. But first, she needed clarity, or at least someone willing to listen. Back on the bus, Laura pulled out her phone again, scrolling through old contacts, until she landed on the name of Officer Jensen. He had worked on the case initially, though his efforts eventually faded along with public interest. Taking a deep breath, she dialed his number, heart pounding as the line rang twice, before going to voicemail. "Officer Jensen," she began hesitantly. "This is Laura Calloway. I think I've found something. Something important about the day my daughter disappeared. Please call me back." By the time Laura reached the cemetery, raindrops were clinging to her hair and clothes, but she barely noticed. The familiar path to Rory's grave stretched ahead of her, lined with headstones bearing the names of other missing children. Each one told a story of loss, of lives cut tragically short. Kneeling down, Laura placed the bouquet gently at the base of the tombstone, tracing the engraved letters with trembling fingers. "Rory," she whispered, "I promise I won't give up, not until I know the truth." As she stood, her eyes drifted toward a figure in the distance, a young woman standing near another grave. Something about her posture struck Laura as familiar, almost haunting. Against her better judgment, Laura approached, calling out softly to avoid startling her. When the woman turned, recognition flickered across her face, followed quickly by fear. It was the same person Laura had seen earlier at Principal Brooks's house. "I'm sorry," Laura said gently, holding up the photograph. "I didn't mean to intrude, but I need to understand. Who are you grieving for?" The woman hesitated, clutching a framed picture close to her chest. After a long pause, she admitted quietly, "One of the students who went missing 27 years ago." Laura's pulse quickened. "Were you related to them?" The woman shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No," she choked out. "I was one of them." Shock rippled through Laura, rooting her to the spot. "You're Audrey Whitman?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The woman nodded, confirming what Laura already suspected. Audrey's resemblance to the girl in the faded photograph was undeniable. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Laura pressed, trying to keep her tone steady, despite the storm brewing inside her. Audrey's gaze dropped to the ground, shame etched into every line of her face. "Because I was scared," she confessed. "Scared of what people would think. Scared of reliving everything. And then Principal Brooks found me. She helped me disappear, start over. But she made me promise never to tell anyone the truth." Laura's mind raced, piecing together the implications of Audrey's words. If Principal Brooks had known all along that Audrey survived, why hadn't she spoken up? Was she protecting Audrey or covering her own tracks? Before Laura could ask more, Helen and Matthew appeared, concern written across their faces. "What's going on?" Helen asked, glancing between Laura and the stranger. "This is Audrey Whitman," Laura explained, her voice shaking. "She was on the bus that day. She's alive," Helen gasped, clutching Matthew's arm for support. Just then, the distant wail of police sirens pierced the air, sending Audrey into a panic. "Please," she begged, backing away. "Don't let them. Take me!" Laura stepped closer, her tone firm yet compassionate. "Audrey, if you love Rory and Sally, if you care about any of the kids who didn't make it, you owe it to them to tell the truth. You're the key to finding out what really happened." Tears streamed down Audrey's face as she wrestled with indecision. Finally, with a shaky nod, she reached for her phone. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll call the police, but only if you stay with me." As officers arrived and escorted Audrey to the station, Laura, Helen, and Matthew followed closely behind, their minds swirling with possibilities. Inside the sterile confines of the police station, tension crackled in the air. Officer Jensen greeted them solemnly, his expression shifting to one of focus as Audrey recounted her harrowing tale. By the time she finished, the room was silent, except for the sound of pens scratching against paper. Principal Lillian Brooks's arrest came swiftly, her confession unraveling years of lies. According to her statement, financial desperation had driven her to conspire with human traffickers, orchestrating the doomed trip under the guise of educational enrichment. The revelation hit Laura like a freight train, leaving her reeling. Yet amidst the devastation, a sliver of hope emerged. Justice might finally be within reach. But the road ahead wouldn't be easy, as Audrey revealed details about the fates of Rory, Sally, and others. Laura and Helen grappled with the unbearable truth. Their daughters hadn't simply vanished. They had suffered unimaginable horrors. Through tears and anguish, Laura vowed to honor Rory's memory by ensuring no family endured such pain again. With Audrey's testimony reigniting the investigation, authorities launched a multinational effort to track down survivors and bring those responsible to justice. As night fell, Laura, Helen, and Matthew sat together outside the police station, exhausted yet resolute. The journey wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time in 27 years, they felt a flicker of closure. For Laura, it was more than answers. It was purpose. And as stars began to dot the sky above, she whispered a silent promise to Rory. "We'll find them, sweetheart, all of them." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the parking lot, Laura, Helen, and Matthew stood in silence, each grappling with the enormity of what they had just learned. The weight of Audrey's revelations hung heavy in the air, but so did a fragile sense of hope. A hope that justice might finally be within reach after 27 years of unanswered questions. For Laura, it wasn't just about closure anymore. It was about honoring Rory's memory by ensuring no one else would suffer as their families had. She turned to Helen and Matthew, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "We need to stay strong for all of them. For Rory, for Sally, for every child who never came home." The days that followed were a blur of activity. News of Principal Lillian Brooks's arrest spread quickly through the small town, reigniting old wounds and sparking outrage among those who had long given up on answers. Reporters camped outside the police station, desperate for details, while social media buzzed with theories and tributes to the missing children. Laura avoided the media frenzy, focusing instead on supporting Audrey, who was now under witness protection. Despite everything Audrey had endured, she remained determined to help bring down the trafficking ring that had destroyed so many lives. Her courage inspired Laura, reminding her of the resilience humans could muster, even in the face of unimaginable pain. Back at the cemetery, Laura visited Rory's grave once more, this time accompanied by Helen and Matthew. Together, they placed fresh flowers, not only at Rory and Sally's headstones, but also at the graves of other missing children. It felt like a small act of defiance against the darkness that had consumed their lives for so long. As Laura knelt beside her daughter's tombstone, she whispered softly, "I promised you I'd find out what happened, sweetheart. And now No, you didn't deserve any of this, but your story will matter. It does matter." Tears streamed down her face, but for the first time in decades, they weren't tears of despair. They carried a glimmer of peace, however bittersweet. Meanwhile, authorities worked tirelessly to piece together the full scope of the tragedy. With Audrey's testimony and evidence uncovered from Principal Brooks' house, investigators traced connections between the school trip and an international human trafficking network. The case gained international attention, prompting governments to collaborate in dismantling the operation. Dozens of arrests were made, and several survivors were identified, though many families still faced the heartbreaking reality that their loved ones would never return. Each discovery brought both relief and renewed grief, underscoring the complexity of seeking justice after such profound loss. For Audrey, life began anew under a different name in a quiet coastal town, far from the memories that haunted her. Though she struggled daily with the trauma of her past, she found solace in knowing she had helped expose the truth. Laura kept in touch, sending letters filled with updates about the investigation and words of encouragement. In one letter, Audrey wrote back, thanking Laura for believing in her when she couldn't believe in herself. "You gave me a second chance," she penned. And because of you, maybe others can have one too. Months later, the trial of Principal Lillian Brooks commenced, drawing national attention. Testimonies from Audrey, former colleagues, and surviving victims painted a harrowing picture of greed, desperation, and betrayal. Brooks, once seen as a pillar of the community, was exposed as someone willing to sacrifice innocent lives to save her own. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, the courtroom erupted in a mix of cheers and sobs. Laura sat quietly, holding Helen's hand, feeling a surge of vindication tempered by sorrow. Justice had been served, but it couldn't undo the damage done. In the aftermath, Laura, Helen, and Matthew became advocates for change, pushing for stricter regulations around school trips and greater accountability for educational institutions. They founded a support group for families affected by similar tragedies, creating a safe space for sharing stories and finding strength in solidarity. Through their efforts, they transformed their personal pain into something meaningful, ensuring that Rory, Sally, and the other children would not be forgotten. On the anniversary of the disappearance the following year, Laura returned to the cemetery, this time without fear or regret. She carried a single rose and a note addressed to Rory. "Happy birthday, my love," it read. "Your light may have been extinguished too soon, but it continues to guide me. Because of you, I've learned to fight for what's right, to honor those we've lost, and to cherish every moment we're given." Placing the note beneath the bouquet, she stood and looked around at the rows of headstones. Each one represented a life cut short, a family forever changed. Yet standing there, surrounded by reminders of loss, Laura felt a strange sense of connection, not just to Rory, but to everyone who had loved and lost. As she walked away, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of lavender. It reminded her of those countless afternoons spent sipping tea with Helen, clinging to friendship during the darkest times. Life hadn't turned out the way she'd imagined, but it had taught her resilience, compassion, and the importance of fighting for justice, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. And though the road ahead would always hold echoes of grief, Laura knew she wasn't alone. Together, she, Helen, Matthew, and Audrey, and all the others touched by this tragedy, had forged a bond stronger than any force that sought to tear them apart. Driving home, Laura glanced at the passenger seat, where a framed photo of Rory rested. She smiled faintly, whispering, "We did it, baby. We found the truth." Outside, the sky cleared, revealing a tapestry of stars, stretching endlessly above. Somewhere among them, Laura liked to think, Rory was watching over her, proud of the legacy her mother had built in her name.